Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do, in a small hut, a baby's cries echoed piercing through the howling wind. The old midwife looked at the tiny girl wrapped in a tattered cloth and sighed, "This child has no one." She muttered, staring at the lifeless body of a young woman who had died, giving birth just as she was about to leave the crying baby to fate. A shadow appeared at the doorway. It was Aunt Marla. "Give me the child," she said, her voice calm but firm. The midwife hesitated. "You already have a daughter, Aunt Marla," another mouth to feed. "I said, give me the child." The midwife obeyed, handing over the fragile baby. Aunt Marla cradled, her close feeling the warmth of the tiny body against her own. She had no idea that this child would one day be the cause of her greatest regret. Aunt Marla named the baby Leona and took her home to her small hut, where her own daughter, Naomi, slept peacefully. Leona grew up thinking Aunt Marla was her real mother. She loved and obeyed her. Even when Aunt Marla made her do all the chores while Naomi played outside with friends as they grew older, Leona's beauty became undeniable. Her smooth, dark skin glowed like the moonlight, her eyes sparkled like the stars, and her long hair flowed like a river. People in the village began to whisper, "Is she really Aunt Marla's daughter? She looks nothing like her." Naomi, who was once the center of attention, soon found herself overshadowed by Leona's beauty. She noticed how the village boys looked at Leona instead of her. Even the richest trader's son, whom she secretly admired, couldn't take his eyes off. Naomi's jealousy grew like a fire that couldn't be put out. One evening, as Leona finished washing the clothes, she heard Aunt Marla and Naomi whispering in the kitchen. She hid behind the door, listening. "She's not even your real daughter," Naomi hissed. Leona's heart stopped. "She's adopted, isn't she?" Naomi continued, "That's why she's so different from us. She doesn't belong here. Mama, she's just a burden." Aunt Marla sighed heavily. "You're right. She was never mine. I should have left her that night." Leona's hands trembled as she clutched her chest. The only mother she had ever known had never wanted her. After that night, Aunt Marla and Naomi no longer hid their hatred. Leona was no longer treated like a daughter, but like a servant. She cleaned, cooked, and ran errands, while Naomi did nothing. She ate leftovers, while Naomi feasted. Then one morning, Aunt Marla called Leona outside. "You're getting married," she said coldly. Leona gasped. "Married to who?" "To Malik." Aunt Marla replied. Leona's breath caught in her throat. Everyone in the village knew Malik. He was a poor man, a struggling fisherman who lived in a tiny, broken-down hut at the edge of the river. He walked with a limp and people laughed at him, calling him useless. Tears welled in Leona's eyes. "Mama, please." Aunt Marla grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't call me Mama. I should have thrown you away years ago. You are nothing to me now. You will marry Malik and leave this house. Do you understand?" Naomi smirked from the doorway, enjoying Leona's pain. Leona swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no choice the next day, with no wedding dress, no celebration, and no family to bless. Her Leona was sent away as the wife of a man. Everyone mocked, but if only Aunt Marla and Naomi knew the truth about Malik, the poor man they had thrown Leona to was secretly a billionaire. Leona walked behind Malik as he led the way to his small hut. Her heart pounded with fear and sorrow. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run away, but where would she go? She had no family, no one to fight for her. Her wedding had been nothing but an exchange. Aunt Marla giving her away as if she were nothing, Naomi laughing as she left. Malik's home was exactly as the villagers described: small, with a leaking roof, a creaky wooden bed, and a single stool. The air smelled of damp wood and fish. Leona felt a lump rise in her throat. "This is your home now," Malik said, his voice quiet but firm. Leona remained silent, looking around in disbelief from Aunt Marla's house to this. Was this really her fate? Malik watched her carefully. He wasn't blind to her pain, but he said nothing. Instead, he placed a mat on the floor and pointed at it. "You can sleep here." Leona looked at him in surprise. She had feared the worst, that he would demand his rights as a husband on the first night. But he simply lay on the wooden bed, turning his back to her. As the night deepened, Leona curled up on the mat, silent tears rolling down her face. The wind whistled through the cracks in the hut, Just as the loneliness whistled through her heart was this: what her life had become, a wife to a man she didn't love, thrown away like a worthless thing. She cried until sleep finally took her leap. Finally, morning came with whispers and laughter as Leona stepped outside the village. Women gathered pretending to fetch water, but only there to see her look at the rich man's daughter. Now the wife of a beggar, one woman sneered, does Malik even have food to give her? Another added, bursting into laughter. Leona kept her head down, swallowing the shame. She had always been mocked in Aunt Marla's house, but this was worse. Just then, Naomi appeared dressed in fine clothes, her skin glowing with expensive oils. She smirked. Sister, how's married life? She asked, her voice dripping with mockery. Leona clenched her fists. Naomi stepped closer and whispered, you should be grateful. At least someone wanted you. No man of status would ever marry an abandoned child like you. Leona felt the sting of her words, but she refused to let the tears fall in front of her. A part of her wanted Naomi to suffer the way she had, to know what it felt like to be laughed at and left behind. The thought made her stomach twist with shame. She turned and walked away, leaving Naomi laughing with the other women. Leona spent hours by the river staring at her reflection. Maybe they're right, she whispered to herself. Maybe I really am nothing. But deep in her heart, something told her that fate had more in store for her. Days turned into weeks. Leona learned to live with Malik, though she barely spoke to him. She cleaned the hut, fetched water, and cooked. It was not an easy life, but it was better than being in Aunt Marla's house. One afternoon, she was struggling to carry a heavy basket of yams from the market when she tripped. The yams spilled everywhere. The women around her laughed, shaking their heads, even as a poor man's wife. She is still useless, someone muttered. Leona's face burned with embarrassment. She bent down to gather the yams, but before she could, a strong hand reached out and helped her. She looked up in shock. It was Malik. He picked up the yams without a word and handed her the basket. Leona expected him to mock her just as everyone else did, but he didn't. Instead, he said softly, you don't have to carry everything alone. Leona felt something shift inside her. It was the first time in her life someone had offered her kindness without expecting anything in return. For the first time, she looked at Malik properly. He was quiet, mysterious. His eyes held secrets she couldn't understand. After finishing her chores, Leona sat outside watching the sunset. Her stomach rumbled loudly, betraying her hunger. Malik, who had been sharpening a knife, heard the sound. He looked at her for a moment before standing up and walking inside. Moments later, he returned with a small wooden bowl. Eat, he said, placing it beside her. Leona stared at the food, boiled yam and palm oil. It was simple, but to her starving body it was a feast. She hesitated. What about you? Malik shrugged. I already ate, but Leona noticed something. There was no second plate. She realized with a painful jolt that Malik had given her the only food in the house. Tears pricked her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away before he could see. Silently, she picked up the bowl and ate, each bite filling not just her stomach, but also the emptiness inside her heart. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. The hunger and stress soon caught up with Leona. One day, as she tried to fetch water, her legs wobbled. The bucket slipped from her hands, and before she could take another step, the world around her spun, then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on Malik's wooden bed. Her head felt heavy, her body weak. A warm cloth was pressed against her forehead. Leona turned her head slightly and saw Malik sitting beside her, his face filled with worry. You fainted, he said simply. Leona blinked. I'm sorry, she whispered, trying to sit up. Don't move, Malik said, his voice firmer than before. You're burning with fever. Leona had never been cared for like this, not by Aunt Marla, not by Naomi. Malik reached for a small clay bowl and gently lifted her head. Drink, he said, bringing a spoonful of warm herbal mixture to her lips. She hesitated at first. A flicker of doubt passed through her. Why was he doing this? What did he want in return? People didn't just do things for her, not without a price. But the warmth of the liquid slid down her throat, and she sighed in relief. Malik stayed by her side that night, placing cool cloths on her forehead and keeping the fire going. Even in her feverish haze, Leona couldn't stop thinking. Why is he so kind? The man the villagers mocked? The man she had been forced to marry? Who was Malik, really? Leona was still recovering when Naomi came to visit. She walked into the small hut, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "Oh, Leona, is this really where you live?" She laughed. "I thought it was bad, but this..." She shook her head dramatically. "Even the goats in our village live better than this." Leona gripped the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling. She refused to cry. She had already cried enough. Naomi sat down, placing a basket on the ground. "Mother sent food," she said, opening it. Inside were fresh vegetables, dried fish, and warm bread. Leona's stomach twisted at the sight of real food, but before she could reach for it, Naomi suddenly pulled the basket back. "Oh, I forgot," she said with a smirk. "This food isn't for you, it's for me. I just wanted you to see what you're missing." She picked up a piece of bread and took a slow, exaggerated bite. Leona swallowed hard. The humiliation burned in her chest, but she remained silent. Just then Malik walked in. He saw the look on Leona's face, then turned to Naomi. "Leave," he said simply. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Malik said, his voice like steel. "Take your food and leave." Naomi scoffed. "How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am?" Malik stepped closer. "I know exactly who you are. A woman who finds joy in another's suffering, but not here, not in my home." Naomi opened her mouth to argue but stopped. For the first time, she really looked at Malik. There was something about the way he stood, the calm authority in his voice. He was not just some poor, crippled fisherman. Something about him felt powerful. Without another word, Naomi grabbed her basket and stormed out. Leona turned to Malik, stunned. No one had ever defended her like that before. She stared at him, her heart pounding. "Who are you, Malik?" she whispered. Malik only smiled, but his eyes held secrets. Leona couldn't shake the strange feeling Malik left in her heart. He was unlike any man she had ever met. He barely spoke, yet his actions carried more meaning than words ever could. After Naomi's cruel visit, Malik left the hut for hours. Leona sat alone, her thoughts spiraling. Was this her fate to be mocked forever? Night fell, and just as Leona was preparing to sleep, Malik returned carrying a small bundle. He placed it on the floor beside her mat. She looked at him, confused. "What is this?" Malik simply nodded toward it. "Open it." Hesitantly, Leona untied the cloth. Inside was warm bread, roasted fish, and a small wooden flask of fresh palm wine. Leona gasped. Where did you get this?" she whispered. Malik shrugged. "You haven't eaten properly in days." Leona swallowed hard. The last time anyone had cared about her hunger was when she was a child, before Aunt Marla's cruelty had begun. But something twisted in her stomach, a pang of fear. Was this a trap? Some test? She stared at the bundle for a second too long. What if he expected something now, something she wasn't ready to give? Tears filled her eyes as she picked up the bread, but before she could take a bite, she set it down and looked at Malik. "Did you eat?" Malik smirked slightly. "I'm not the one who fainted yesterday." Leona felt her heart tighten. Slowly she broke the bread in half and held one piece out to him. He hesitated. "Please," she whispered, "eat with me." For the first time since she had been forced into this marriage, Malik sat beside her and ate. The silence between them was no longer heavy with pain. It was soft, understanding. And though Leona still did not know who Malik really was, for the first time, she felt safe. That night, the cold wind howled through the cracks in the hut. Leona lay on her mat, shivering, pulling her thin wrapper tightly around her. Malik, on the wooden bed, noticed her discomfort. Without a word, he got up, walked over to her, and placed a thick cloth over her body. Leona's breath hitched. She turned slightly, looking up at him. "Malik, you don't have to. You'll catch another fever," he said simply. Leona clutched the cloth, feeling an unfamiliar warmth. Not from the fabric, but from the kindness she wasn't used to receiving. She turned back, blinking rapidly to stop the tears from falling. She had spent years believing she was unwanted, unloved, but here was a man who owed her nothing, showing her more care than her own family ever had. Leona slept deeply for the first time in years, and for the first time, she dreamed of something other than sadness. The next morning, Leona went to the river to fetch water. As she walked, she heard whispers. "Did you hear? That poor fisherman bought food yesterday. Expensive food. Where did he get the money?" "He must have stolen it." Leona's heart pounded. She reached the market, and the rumors had spread even further. "I saw him with my own eyes," a woman said. "He bought fresh bread and palm wine." How can he afford that? Maybe he's not as poor as we think, another muttered. Leona clenched her fists. The village had always mocked Malik, but now they were suspicious. She hurried home, finding Malik sharpening his knife as usual. "Malik," she said urgently. "Where? Did you get the food yesterday?" He glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Yes, it does," Leona said, stepping closer. "People are talking. They think you stole it." Malik chuckled. "Let them think what they want." Leona frowned. "Malik, I need to know. Who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he simply said, "A man who doesn't want to see his wife suffer." Leona's heart thudded. For the first time, she realized something. Malik was hiding something. And for a moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind. What if he was lying? What if this comfort, this calm, this safety was temporary? She hated herself for thinking it, but the fear sat in her chest like a stone. Leona couldn't shake the feeling that Malik was more than he seemed. His kindness, his quiet strength, the way he carried himself, it was unlike any poor fisherman she had ever known. One evening, as she sat outside peeling cassava, she saw Malik sitting by the doorway, lost in thought. The glow of the setting sun cast long shadows on his face, making him look distant, almost sad. She hesitated before speaking. "Malik, why do you live like this?" Malik's hand stilled on his knife. Leona swallowed. "You could have married anyone, but you took a woman like me, someone thrown away like scraps, and you never complain, never raise your voice. Why?" Malik let out a slow breath. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Because I know what it means to be abandoned." Leona's heart twisted. He turned away, staring into the distance. "I was once a boy who had everything, food, servants, a father who was one of the richest men in the land, but when I lost my ability to walk properly, I became worthless to them. My father sent me away, ashamed of me." Leona's breath hitched. Malik continued, his voice heavy with old wounds. "I learned to survive on my own. I worked in places where no one cared for me, and I realized something. Poverty does not make a person less worthy, but the world will treat you like it does." Leona felt tears sting her eyes. She had spent years being treated as less, simply because she was adopted. She had believed that pain belonged only to her. But here was a man who had suffered just as she had, perhaps even more. For the first time, Leona truly saw Malik not as the poor, crippled man the village mocked, but as someone who understood her in ways no one else ever had. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. He looked at her, surprised. "You are not worthless," she whispered. Something in Malik's eyes softened. He didn't say anything, but his fingers tightened around hers. At that moment, they weren't two strangers forced into a marriage. They were two souls who'd been cast aside, finally finding comfort in each other. The next morning, Leona woke up to something she never expected: laughter. She blinked confused before realizing it was Malik. She stepped outside and found him playing with a small boy from the village. The child giggled as Malik tossed a small wooden carving into the air and caught it with his good hand. Leona had never seen Malik smile before, not like this. It was not the small, unreadable smirk he usually gave. This was pure joy. She watched mesmerized. The man who had always seemed so distant, so closed off, was completely different. In this moment, then Malik looked up and saw her watching. His smile faltered, and for a second he looked embarrassed. Leona chuckled. "I didn't know you could smile like that." Malik rubbed the back of his neck. "The boy likes stories. I was just telling him one." Leona knelt beside the boy. "What story?" The child beamed. "A story about a king who pretended to be poor so he could find a wife who truly loved him." Leona's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Malik, but he only looked at her with that same unreadable expression. Something about the story made her heart race. Why did it feel so familiar? Later that evening, as Leona was returning from the river, she saw a familiar figure waiting outside the hut. Naomi, her stepsister, stood there, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with mischief. "I see you're still here," Naomi sneered. "I thought by now you'd have run away from this miserable life." Leona sighed, too tired to argue. "What do you want?" Naomi smirked and held up a shiny gold bracelet. Leona's heart stopped. That bracelet belonged to her. It was the only thing she had from her real parents. "Where did you get that?" she asked, stepping closer. Naomi dangled it in front of her mother. "Found it in your things and gave it to me." She said, "You, Don't need something. This beautiful since you'll never be anything more than a poor fisherman's wife. Leona's hands trembled. That's mine, she whispered. Naomi laughed. Not anymore. Then before Leona could react, Naomi threw the bracelet into the muddy ground and stepped on it with her heel, grinding it into the dirt. Leona gasped. She rushed forward, pushing Naomi aside, and picked up the bracelet. It was bent, covered in mud. Ruined tears filled her eyes. Naomi clapped her hands. Oh look, poor, pathetic Leona, crying over a useless piece of metal. Leona clenched the bracelet to her chest. Her entire body, shaking. Malik suddenly appeared in the doorway. He saw the scene and his jaw tightened. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously low. Naomi smirked. Oh, and what are you going to do about it, cripple? Malik took a step forward. There was something in his stance, something powerful, something commanding. Naomi's smirk faltered. For the first time she looked afraid. She scoffed, but quickly turned and walked away. Leona stood there clutching the ruined bracelet. Her heart breaking. Malik gently took it from her hands without a word. He walked inside. Moments later he returned with a small soft cloth and a knife. He sat down and began carefully straightening the bent metal, cleaning away the dirt. Leona watched, unable to speak. Minutes passed. Then Malik handed it back to her. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers again. Leona looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. Malik didn't say anything. But in that moment, Leona knew this man, the one she had been forced to marry, was the only person who had ever truly cared for her, and her heart would never be the same again. That night, Leona sat by the small oil lamp, turning the bracelet over in her hands. She traced the bent edges, the small scratches Naomi had left behind. It wasn't the same anymore, but it was still hers. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She thought about her life, how Aunt Marla had raised her like a servant, how Naomi had stolen everything from her, and how she had been thrown away like trash. She covered her mouth, trying to muffle the sob that threatened to escape, but Malik heard. She felt his presence before she saw him. He moved quietly, sitting down beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he placed a wooden cup filled with warm tea beside her. Leona stared at it, her hands shaking. No one had ever comforted her like this. Before, no one had ever noticed her pain. She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. His warmth was steady, solid for the first time in her life. She wasn't completely alone. She looked at Malik, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think I will ever be happy? Malik's gaze was unreadable, but then he did something she never expected. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You will, he said softly, because you are stronger than you think. Leona's heart ached. She wanted to believe him. She really did. The next morning, as Leona was washing clothes by the river, she heard laughter. The sound sent chills down her spine. She turned, and there stood Aunt Marla. Her heart clenched. Aunt Marla was dressed in fine flowing wrappers, her arms heavy with gold bracelets. She looked at Leona with the same disgust she had always carried in her eyes. I see marriage hasn't changed. You, Aunt Marla sneered. Still a filthy, pitiful girl. Leona clenched her fists. She should have ignored her. She should have walked away, but Aunt Marla stepped closer. Lowering her voice, you think you are suffering now, she whispered. This is only the beginning. No one will ever love a girl like you. Not truly. Leona's breath caught in her throat. Aunt Marla smiled, a cruel, wicked smile. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Leona standing there, trembling. She didn't realize Malik had been watching from a distance. She didn't see the way his hands clenched into fists or the storm that darkened his eyes. But that night, when Leona lay on the small mat, curled into herself, she felt Malik drape a thin blanket over her shoulders. When she turned to look at him, he simply said, she was wrong. Leona didn't respond, but for the first time, Aunt Marla's words didn't feel quite as heavy, because Malik's presence made them easier to bear. Days passed, and something changed between Leona and Malik. He no longer felt like a stranger. As they sat outside watching the stars, Leona found herself asking, do you ever wish things were different? Malik turned to her, his face unreadable. What do you mean? She hesitated. Do you ever wish you had married someone else? Someone who deserved you? Malik's jaw tightened. Don't say that. Leona looked away. It's true, I was thrown away, given to you like I was nothing. Malik reached for her hand, His touch was warm, firm. "You are not nothing," he said quietly. "You are everything." Leona's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She looked at Malik, truly looked at him. And for the first time she wondered, who was this man she had married? Why did he seem so different, so important? Something about him didn't add up, and Leona was determined to find out the truth. That night, Leona couldn't sleep. Malik's words played over and over in her head. "You are not nothing. You are everything." Why had he said that? Why did he look at her like she was worth something, when her whole life had been proof that she wasn't? She turned on the thin mat, staring at the wooden roof of their small hut. The night air was thick with the scent of burning wood and distant rain. She had never questioned Malik before. He was a poor man, a simple man. That's what she had been told. But there was something in the way he carried himself, something in the quiet strength of his words. It unsettled her. And for the first time, she wondered, who really was the man she had been forced to marry? The next morning, as Leona swept the front yard, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, and her heart nearly stopped. Naomi. She was dressed in the finest wrapper, her head tied with bright beads. Her fingers were heavy with golden rings. Leona felt her throat tighten. Naomi smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Look at you," she said, eyes glinting with amusement. "Living like a beggar." Leona clenched the broom in her hands. Naomi stepped closer, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You should have known, Leona. You were never one of us. Aunt Marla and I only kept you because it made us look good." Leona's chest ached. She had always known Naomi and Aunt Marla didn't love her. But hearing it again now still hurt. For a moment rage rose up in her throat. She wanted to scream, to throw Naomi's words back in her face, to say something that would hurt. But she took a breath. No. She wouldn't give Naomi the satisfaction. She wouldn't become like them. Aunt Marla didn't love her, but hearing it spoken, so plainly, like she was nothing more than a discarded object, felt like a knife in her heart. Naomi smirked. "Did you really think you deserved a good life? A girl like you, an orphan, a nobody?" Leona swallowed the pain rising in her throat. She would not cry, not this time. Instead, she straightened her back, meeting Naomi's gaze with quiet defiance. "I may be poor," she said softly, "but I am not broken." For the first time, Naomi's smirk faltered. Something about Leona had changed, and Naomi didn't like it. She turned sharply, her golden bracelets clinking as she walked away. Leona stood there, staring after her, her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a helpless girl begging for love. She felt like something more. But still, a small voice whispered inside her. What would it have been like if she had been the one Aunt Marla loved? The one dressed in silk, adored, chosen? She clenched her fists. She hated that voice. She hated that part of her still wanted what Naomi had. She had a feeling deep in her bones that Malik had something to do with the strength she was finally starting to feel. Later that evening, Leona sat outside watching Malik as he mended a basket. She hesitated before speaking. "Why? Did you marry me?" Malik paused, looking up. His eyes searched hers. "Because I wanted to," he said simply. Leona frowned. "But why? I was forced on you. You could have refused." Malik sighed, setting the basket aside. "You think you were the only one who was forced?" he asked quietly. Leona's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Malik looked away for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Then he turned back to her, his face unreadable. "Things are not always what they seem, Leona," he said. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. Malik was hiding something, and whatever it was, it would change everything. Leona sat frozen, Malik's words echoing in her mind. "You think you were the only one who was forced." What did he mean? She had always believed she was the one thrown away, the one abandoned. But Malik's voice held something deeper, something she couldn't quite grasp. She watched him as he returned to his work, his fingers steady as they weaved the basket. "Malik," she whispered, her throat dry. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sighed, setting the basket aside. Then he met her gaze. "Do you really want to know?" Leona swallowed hard. "Yes." Malik stood up, brushing the dust from his clothes. "Follow me." Leona followed Malik through the narrow, winding paths of the village. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the ground. She didn't ask where they were going. Something in Malik's posture told her. She was about to find out everything after what felt like an eternity. They stopped in front of a massive iron gate. Leona's heart pounded. This wasn't a poor man's home. This was a mansion. She turned to Malik, her lips trembling. "What is this?" Malik stepped forward. Pushing the gate open, inside was a grand compound filled with towering trees, golden lanterns, and a house so large it looked like something from a dream. Leona's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her whole life being told she wasn't worthy of love, that she was destined for nothing. Yet the man she had been forced to marry was standing before a palace. Malik turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is my home," he said softly. Leona took a shaky step forward. "But you're poor." Malik's lips curled into a small smile. "No, Leona, I only wanted people to think I was poor." She felt dizzy. Nothing made sense anymore. Malik walked ahead, leading her toward the grand house. Leona followed, her heart racing as they stepped inside. She stared at the fine woven rugs, the large carved chairs, the golden ornaments decorating the walls. She turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" Malik sighed, looking away. "Because I needed to know who truly loved me. I was tired of women who only saw my wealth." Leona's heart ached. So this whole time he had been testing her. She thought back to the suffering, the hunger, the pain. "You let me believe we were struggling," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You let me cry myself to sleep thinking I had lost everything." Malik stepped closer. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Leona, but you did," she said, her eyes welling up. "You did." Malik reached for her hands, but she stepped back. She had spent her whole life being lied to. She didn't know if she could take another betrayal. Malik's eyes softened. "Leona, I love you." She let out a broken laugh, wiping her tears. "Then, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Malik took a deep breath. "Because I was afraid." Leona closed her eyes. She didn't know what hurt more, the truth itself or the fact that he had waited so long to tell her. She turned away, her heart heavy. "I need time," she whispered, and for the first time since they had been married, she walked away from Malik. Leona walked away from Malik, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to leave. Her feet carried her down the grand steps of the mansion, past the beautiful gardens, past the iron gates that had once held so many secrets. How could Malik do this to her? She had suffered, cried, starved, believing they had nothing, believing she was worthless, and all along he had everything. Tears streamed down her face as she walked aimlessly down the empty road. She thought of Aunt Marla and Naomi. She thought of the day they had thrown her away like she was nothing. She thought of the nights she had cried herself to sleep in the tiny leaking hut, thinking she was doomed to suffer for the rest of her life. And now, just when she thought she had found peace, another lie had shattered her world. Leona didn't realize where she was going until she reached Aunt Marla's house, the place she had once called home. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door. A moment later, it swung open. Naomi stood there, dressed in another fine wrapper, her hair shining with oil. At first, her face twisted with confusion. Then, when she saw the tears in Leona's eyes, a slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. "Look, who came crawling back?" she sneered. Leona swallowed hard. "I just needed," Naomi laughed, crossing her arms. "Needed? What a reminder that you don't belong here." Leona clenched her fists. "I never belonged here, did I?" Naomi's smile widened. "You're..." Finally, learning, Leona turned to leave, but Naomi's next words made her freeze. "I heard about your husband," she said, her voice mocking. "The poor little you were forced to marry." Anger burned in Leona's chest. Naomi didn't know the truth. She didn't know Malik was richer than she could ever imagine. For a moment, Leona wanted to tell her to wipe that smug look off her face, but then she realized Naomi didn't deserve to know, not yet. Leona straightened her back, wiping her tears. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I was forced to marry him." Naomi's smirk deepened. "But do you know what, Naomi?" Leona continued, stepping closer. "For the first time in my life, I was loved." Naomi's smile faded. "And I would rather be with a poor man who loves me," Leona whispered, "than stay in a house full of people who never did." Naomi's face darkened with anger. Leona turned and walked away, her heart still aching, but her spirit stronger than ever. The night was cool when Leona finally returned to the mansion. She didn't want to see Malik. She didn't know what to say to him, but as she stepped through the gates, she found him waiting for her. He stood there in the dim light, his face filled with worry. "Leona," he breathed, stepping closer. "Where did you go?" She looked away. "I needed to think." Malik hesitated. "And what did you decide?" Leona's throat tightened. "I don't know," Malik sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I never meant to hurt you, Leona. I only wanted to find someone who loved me for who I was, not for my wealth." Leona shook her head. "And what about me?" "Malik? Did you ever think about what I was going through? Did you ever wonder how it felt to believe I was stuck in a life of suffering when all along it was just a test?" Pain flashed in Malik's eyes. "I did, Leona, and every time I saw you struggle, I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid you would hate me." Leona let out a shaky breath. She did hate him, but she also loved him. She had seen his kindness, his patience, the way he treated her even when he had nothing to gain. But could she ever forgive him? Malik took her hands gently. "Leona, please," he whispered. "Don't leave me." Tears welled up in her eyes. Could she walk away from the one person who had ever truly loved her, or was there still hope for them? The news spread like wildfire. Aunt Marla was sitting outside her home peeling cassava when she overheard two women whispering nearby. "Did you hear?" one of them said, leaning in closer to the other. "Malik isn't poor." Aunt Marla's hands froze. "What do you mean?" The other woman asked, her voice full of disbelief. The first woman scoffed. You haven't heard that Malik, Leona's husband, is actually a billionaire. He has mansions, lands, businesses, everything." Aunt Marla's heart stopped. "A billionaire." Her head spun as their words sank. In all this time she had mocked Leona, laughed at her suffering, and called her useless. All this time she had pitied Naomi for not being chosen. And now she found out that the very man they had thrown Leona to was richer than all of them combined. Aunt Marla's blood boiled. Why wasn't it Naomi who had married him? Why had it been Leona, the unwanted one? She clenched her fists, her breathing ragged. No, this couldn't happen. She would not sit back and let Leona enjoy a life meant for Naomi. Something had to be done. That night Aunt Marla gathered some villagers, those who hated seeing others rise. Above them, they sat in a dark corner of her house, their voices hushed but filled with malice. "We cannot allow that girl to live in wealth while we suffer." Aunt Marla hissed. One of the men, a notorious troublemaker, smirked. "What do you have in mind?" Aunt Marla's eyes gleamed with wickedness. "We will go to that mansion. We will make her pay. We will show her that she does not belong there." The villagers nodded in agreement, their minds poisoned with envy. Tomorrow they would strike the next evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. A group of villagers marched toward Malik's mansion. They carried sticks and stones, their eyes filled with greed and anger. Aunt Marla led them, her face twisted with rage, as they reached the grand gates. She raised her voice. "Leona," she screamed, "come out inside the mansion." Leona and Malik were having dinner. When the shouts reached them, Leona's heart clenched. She recognized that voice. Aunt Marla. Malik's expression darkened as he stood. "Stay here," he told Leona, but Leona shook her head. "No, I need to face her." Together they walked outside when Aunt Marla saw Leona dressed in fine clothes, her skin glowing with happiness. She nearly burst with rage. "You ungrateful wretch," she spat. "You stole what should have been Naomi's." Leona flinched, but Malik stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Enough." He thundered. The villagers hesitated. This was not the weak man they had mocked. This was a man of power. Malik's eyes burned with fury. "How dare you come to my home and threaten my wife?" Aunt Marla sneered. "She does not belong here." Malik stepped closer, his voice cold. "Leona belongs by my side, and if you or anyone else ever try to hurt her again, you will regret it." The villagers shifted uncomfortably. The plan had failed. Aunt Marla's face turned pale as she realized the truth. She had no power here. Malik was too strong, too rich, too well-respected. She had lost as the villagers slinked away in shame. Leona turned to Malik, her eyes filled with tears. "You defended me," she whispered. Malik cupped her face gently. "I will always defend you." Leona, her heart swelled with love. For the first time in her life, she was not alone. She was safe. Malik took her hands in his gaze steady. "No one will ever hurt you again." Leona broke down, sobbing into his chest. For years, she had been unwanted. For years, she had been tossed aside, like she was nothing but not anymore. Now she had a home. Now she had love. Now she had Malik, and nothing, not even Aunt Marla's hatred, could take that away from her. That night, Aunt Marla lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body felt weak, her heart heavy. She had lost all her plans to bring Leona down, had failed, and now, instead of Naomi living in a mansion dressed in fine clothes, eating expensive meals, it was Leona, the girl she had despised, the girl she had always treated as a burden. Tears slipped down her wrinkled cheeks. Had she made a mistake? No. She refused to believe it. Naomi should have been the one to marry Malik. Naomi was her real daughter, but deep inside a painful truth gnawed at her. It wasn't Leona's fault. It had never been. Leona had done nothing wrong. She had only wanted love, a family, and a place to belong, and Aunt Marla had taken all of that away from her. She turned to Naomi, who was sitting at the corner. Her arms crossed her face. "Sour, this is your fault, Mama," Naomi muttered. "If you hadn't forced Leona to marry that man, I could have had a chance." Aunt Marla's heart clenched. For the first time, she saw the greed in her own daughter's eyes. She had raised Naomi to be just like her, bitter and selfish, and now she was reaping the consequences. But it was too late. Malik had chosen Leona, and nothing could change that. A few days later, a letter arrived at Aunt Marla's home. It was from Leona with shaky hands. She opened it and began to read. Aunt Marla, "I know you never loved me. I know you never wanted me. But despite everything, I do not hate you. I have a new life now, a life full of love and happiness. Malik is a good man. He takes care of me. He treats me well. I lack nothing. I wish things had been different between us. I wish you had seen me as your daughter, but I will not live in the past. I have chosen to be happy. I forgive you." Leona. Aunt Marla's hands trembled as she finished reading. Tears welled in her eyes. Leona had forgiven her. After all the pain she had caused, she clutched the letter to her chest. Her body shaking, she didn't deserve forgiveness. She had failed as a mother, but Leona, the girl she had cast aside, had a heart big enough to forgive her. And that realization shattered her completely. Leona stood by the window of her new home, watching the sunrise beside her. Malik wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" he asked gently. Leona nodded. "I sent her a letter," she whispered. "I don't know if she will ever accept me as a daughter, but I wanted her to know. I hold no grudge." Malik turned her around to face him, his eyes full of admiration. "You have the purest heart, Leona." She smiled, resting her head against his chest. For years, she had longed for love. Now she had it, not from Aunt Marla but from Malik, and that was enough. Months passed. Malik and Leona's love grew stronger. They traveled together, explored new places, and built a beautiful life side by side. Leona was no longer the girl who was neglected and unwanted. She was now a woman who was loved beyond measure. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through their garden, Malik stopped and turned to her. "I have one last surprise for you." Leona raised an eyebrow. "Another surprise?" "What is it?" Malik smiled and knelt down, pulling out a small box. Leona gasped. He opened it to reveal a sparkling diamond ring. "We had a forced marriage," Malik said, his voice full of emotion. "But I want to marry you properly. Will you marry me again? This time by choice." Tears spilled down Leona's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. Malik slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. This was love. This was happiness. This was the life she had always dreamed of, and finally, she had it.